Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Louisiana. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The papers arrived in a decaying leather case, discovered during renovations of the old Charity Hospital archives in New Orleans. They hadn't been touched since 1869, when a former hospital administrator had sealed them away in a hidden compartment behind the eastern wall of the record room. The workmen who found them almost discarded the bundle, thinking it nothing more than rotting trash, until one noticed the meticulous handwriting covering the yellowed pages within. When Elijah Thompson, head archivist at the Louisiana Historical Society, was called to examine the find in 1965, he had no idea that the contents would lead him down a path so disturbing that he would later request a permanent leave of absence. The documents contained detailed accounts of a series of medical studies conducted in the shadows of New Orleans medicine, hidden for over a century. Studies involving human subjects who had no choice in the matter. The papers belonged to a Dr. Mason Blackwood, who served at Charity Hospital from 1846 to 1852. His name appears in the official hospital records only as a staff physician specializing in pulmonary ailments. Nothing in the formal records indicated anything unusual about his tenure, but the private journals told a completely different story. Dr. Blackwood, as his personal writings revealed, had come to New Orleans with a purpose beyond the healing arts as they were traditionally practiced. He had a theory about human resilience, specifically about differences in pain threshold and endurance between what he clinically referred to as different specimens of the human genus. His interest was not merely academic. Charity Hospital, established in 1736, had by the mid-19th century grown into the largest medical institution in the South, treating both white citizens and, in segregated facilities, the enslaved population, whose labor built the region's prosperity. This segregation created the perfect laboratory for a man like Blackwood, separate spaces where certain activities could be conducted away from public scrutiny. The first entry in Blackwood's journal was dated March 12, 1849. The handwriting was controlled, almost architectural in its precision. He wrote of acquiring his first 5 subjects from a local plantation owner who had graciously donated damaged property to the advancement of medical science. The term damaged property referred to 5 men who had developed respiratory ailments that rendered them, in the owner's assessment, unfit for field labor. According to Louisiana records from the East Bank Parish Clerk's office, this plantation owner was likely Walter Beaumont, whose sugar plantation lay 23 miles upriver from New Orleans. Beaumont's plantation records, still partially preserved in the state archives, show that in February 1849, he indeed sold 5 men to an unnamed medical establishment for a nominal sum. What happened to these men after they arrived at the separate wing of Charity Hospital, where Blackwood conducted his work, remains one of the darkest chapters in American medical history. The journals describe a progressive series of trials designed to test human endurance of specific respiratory irritants, temperature extremes, and oxygen deprivation. Blackwood's entries grew increasingly detailed as his experiments continued through the spring and summer of 1849. He recorded pulse rates, respiratory patterns, and what he called vocalization intensities during his procedures. Most disturbing were his notes on something he termed comparative endurance metrics, where he would subject both his enslaved subjects and occasional white patients who suffered from severe mental disturbances and had been committed to the hospital's care by their families to identical stimuli. From the records that survived, it appears that Blackwood had convinced himself that he was pursuing legitimate scientific inquiry. He repeatedly referenced his hope to publish his findings in medical journals of England and France, where he believed his methodology would be better understood than by his provincial American colleagues. By June of 1849, something changed in Blackwood's work. His handwriting, previously so controlled, became more hurried. his entries more frequent but shorter. He mentioned receiving a letter from a Dr. James Reynolds of Philadelphia, who had somehow heard rumors of Blackwood's research. The content of Reynolds' letter was not preserved, but whatever it contained clearly disturbed Blackwood deeply. After this letter, Blackwood's entries show a man increasingly paranoid about being discovered. He wrote of moving his research to a secondary location, a property he purchased under an associate's name in the bayou, 14 miles southwest of the city. Parish records confirm that a property in that area was indeed purchased by a George Stilwell, who served as an orderly at Charity Hospital on July 3, 1849. The remote bayou property, accessible only by boat through a maze of waterways, provided Blackwood with the isolation he craved for his increasingly disturbing work. His journal describes the small wooden structure he had built there, 2 rooms separated by a thick wall with a small observation window. The larger room contained what he described as his laboratory, while the smaller held his subjects. August 12, 1849, marks the beginning of what Blackwood called his Phase 2 investigations. He had apparently developed a theory that extreme psychological stress altered physical endurance in measurable ways. His notes detail how he began to subject his remaining subjects, only 3 of the original 5 remained at this point, to extended periods of sensory manipulation. The journal describes rooms kept in absolute darkness for days, followed by exposure to constant illumination. Sounds played at irregular intervals to prevent sleep. And most disturbing, situations where subjects were placed in proximity to one another, but prevented from offering comfort or assistance, while one was subjected to Blackwood's tests. What makes these accounts particularly chilling is the clinical, detached tone with which Blackwood recorded his observations. There is no indication in his writing that he viewed his subjects as human beings. They were consistently referred to by assigned numbers, never by names. However, through careful cross-referencing with plantation sale records, historian Dorothy Walsh of Tulane University managed in 1962 to identify one of Blackwood's subjects as a man named Solomon, aged approximately 32, who had previously worked as a skilled carpenter on the Beaumont plantation. This discovery came too late for any justice, but it restored at least one name to history. By September, Blackwood's journals show increasing references to something he called the ultimate threshold experiment. Details are vague in the initial entries, but it appears he had designed some form of culminating test that would, in his mind, conclusively prove his theories about comparative human endurance. On September 23, 1849, something went catastrophically wrong at the Bayou Laboratory. Blackwood's entry from that date consists of just 3 lines. Experiment terminated prematurely. Total loss of subjects. Evidence disposed of in the bayou depths. The next entry doesn't appear until October 7th, and the handwriting is noticeably different, shaky, uncontrolled. Blackwood writes of fevers and difficulty sleeping. He mentions hearing sounds at night that cannot possibly be real. He questions whether something followed him back from the bayou property. Throughout October and November of 1849, Blackwood's entries become increasingly erratic. He writes of seeing the figures of his subjects standing at the foot of his bed at night, of hearing their breathing in empty rooms, of finding his research notes rearranged in the morning, though he lived alone and kept his home securely locked. By December, the entries suggest a man in the grip of either severe mental illness or, as some historians have controversially suggested, an overwhelming guilt that manifested as hallucinatory episodes. He writes of one subject in particular, whom he now refers to not by number, but as the watchful one, who seems to observe him constantly from doorways and shadows. The final entry in Blackwood's journal is dated January 3, 1850. It reads simply, "They are coming for me tonight. I hear them gathering outside. I deserve what comes." Mason Blackwood was found dead in his French Quarter residence on January 4, 1850. The official cause of death was recorded as apoplexy, what we would now likely call a stroke. He was discovered by his housekeeper, sitting upright at his desk, his journal open before him. The housekeeper reported to authorities that the expression on Blackwood's face was one of unimaginable terror. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case comes not from Blackwood's journals, but from a seemingly unrelated police report filed that same week. Authorities were called to investigate strange sounds coming from an abandoned warehouse near the riverfront, approximately half a mile from Blackwood's residence. Upon arrival, they found nothing except walls covered in handprints of varying sizes, too high up to have been made by anyone standing on the floor. The report was filed and forgotten. After Blackwood's death, his position at Charity Hospital was filled by another physician, and life continued. His personal effects, including his journals, were collected by hospital administrator Thomas Woodward, who apparently read enough to understand the dangerous nature of their contents. Woodward, according to a brief notation on the leather case that contained the journals, made the decision to seal away the documents rather than destroy them, perhaps feeling that some record, however terrible, should be preserved. The journals remained hidden until 1965, when renovations revealed their hiding place. After their discovery, a committee of historians and medical ethicists was formed to determine their fate. After much debate, the decision was made to preserve them in a secured archive, accessible only to qualified researchers studying the history of medical ethics violations. In 1968, historian Elijah Thompson, who had originally examined the journals, attempted to locate the Bayou property where Blackwood conducted his most disturbing experiments. Using the geographical descriptions in the journals and period maps of the area, Thompson believed he had identified the likely location, a small, overgrown island that locals had long avoided, claiming it was bad ground. Thompson organized an expedition to the site, accompanied by 2 graduate students and a local guide familiar with the Bayou waterways. They departed New Orleans on June 21, 1968. 3 days later, the guide returned alone, in a state of extreme distress. He claimed that upon reaching the island, Thompson had become increasingly agitated, insisting that he could hear voices coming from beneath the murky water surrounding the landmass. According to the guide, Thompson waded into a shallow area, claiming he needed to find them and tell them it's over. Despite the efforts of his students, Thompson could not be dissuaded from venturing deeper into the water. The guide's account states that Thompson suddenly screamed that something had grabbed his ankle, and he was pulled below the surface. The students attempted to rescue Thompson, but were unable to locate him in the dark, sediment-filled water. After hours of searching, they too disappeared while the guide was preparing their boat for departure. Parish authorities conducted a 3-week search of the area, but found no trace of Thompson or his students. The case was eventually classified as an accidental drowning, likely due to the treacherous nature of the bayou currents. The island has since been reclaimed by rising water levels, and its exact location lost to the ever-shifting landscape of the Louisiana bayou. Local environmental officials note that the entire area where the island once stood is now part of a protected wetland, inaccessible to the public. In 1969, all materials related to Mason Blackwood, including his journals and Thompson's research notes, were sealed in the Louisiana State Archives under a 75-year restriction. The official reason given was sensitivity of historical materials and potential genealogical distress to descendants of all parties involved. Today, the story of Dr. Mason Blackwood and his experiments exists in a strange liminal space between documented history and local legend. Residents of the parishes surrounding New Orleans occasionally speak of strange sounds coming from certain parts of the bayou. Sounds they describe as like people trying to breathe underwater. Fishermen avoid specific channels and inlets, not always able to articulate why, beyond a generational understanding that some waters are not right. What remains undeniable is the physical evidence. The journals themselves, Blackwood's death certificate, the record of property purchase, and the sales documents for those men treated as research subjects rather than human beings. These papers testify to a history that many would prefer to forget, a time when medical science was wielded as a tool of oppression rather than healing. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Blackwood case is how close it came to being lost entirely. Hidden behind a wall for nearly a century, almost thrown away as garbage, and then nearly sealed away again by those disturbed by its contents. It raises the unsettling question: how many other such histories remain buried, their victims unnamed, their perpetrators unpunished? The bayou waters rise and fall with the seasons. Sediment shifts, covering what lies beneath, then occasionally revealing fragments of the past during violent storms. In 1965, Hurricane Betsy's devastating path through Louisiana uncovered numerous historical artifacts thought lost, including, some locals claim, wooden remnants of a structure in the exact area where Thompson believed Blackwood's laboratory once stood. The remains were reportedly collected by an unnamed local resident and stored in a shed behind their home. When university researchers learned of this and sought to examine the fragments in 1967, they discovered the shed had burned to the ground in a fire that locals described as burning with an unusual color. The final known reference to the Blackwood case comes from the private correspondence of Dorothy Walsh, the Tulane historian who identified Solomon, one of Blackwood's victims. In a letter to a colleague dated September 23, 1969, exactly 120 years after Blackwood's fateful ultimate threshold experiment, Walsh wrote, "I dreamed of him last night. Not Blackwood, but Solomon. He stood at the foot of my bed watching me, not threatening, just waiting. When I asked what he wanted, he said only, 'To be remembered.' I believe this is all any of us can truly ask for." Walsh died peacefully in her sleep the following night. Her extensive research notes on the Blackwood case were donated to Tulane University's special collections, where they remain available to researchers today, the only publicly accessible materials related to one of Louisiana's darkest medical histories. In the years since, the waterways have changed, neighborhoods have shifted, and Charity Hospital itself closed after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The building stands empty now, a massive Art Deco monument to both healing and harm. Former staff occasionally report that in the oldest sections of the building, particularly on still, humid nights, the sound of labored breathing can sometimes be heard coming from rooms that have stood empty for years. And sometimes, in the French Quarter, in the early hours before dawn, residents report seeing a figure standing perfectly still on street corners, a well-dressed man in outdated clothing, writing frantically in a journal that seems to glow faintly in the darkness. By the time anyone approaches, the figure is gone, leaving nothing behind but the lingering smell of river water and the sound of pages turning in an unfelt breeze. The truth of what happened in that bayou laboratory in 1849 may never be fully known, but in archives and memories, in whispered stories and academic papers, the echoes of those events continue to resonate. The doctor who believed he could measure human suffering, the men whose pain was recorded but whose humanity was denied, the researchers who later sought to uncover the truth only to be consumed by it in turn. Some stories resist being forgotten, no matter how deeply they are buried. Some voices continue to speak, long after they have been silenced. And in the dark waters of Louisiana's bayous, some secrets remain just below the surface, neither fully concealed nor completely revealed, waiting for someone to finally listen. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Blackwood case is not what was found, but what remains missing. According to inventory lists discovered alongside the journals, Blackwood maintained extensive anatomical specimens and tissue samples from his subjects. These specimens were never recovered. Hospital Administrator Thomas Woodward made no mention of them in his notes about securing the journals, leading some researchers to speculate that they may remain hidden somewhere, either in forgotten storage at the old Charity Hospital or, more unsettlingly, at the Bayou Laboratory site itself. In 1957, 8 years before the journals were discovered, a fisherman named Claude Thibodeau reported finding unusual glass containers washed up on a small muddy bank deep in the bayou. According to his account, given to the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Department, the containers held what appeared to be preserved human tissue. Thibodeau, disturbed by his discovery, reburied the containers and marked the location with a distinctive arrangement of stones. When he returned 2 days later with authorities, both the containers and the stone marker were gone, with no sign that the mud had been disturbed. This incident was dismissed as the imagination of a man who had spent too many solitary hours in the bayou. However, when compared with details from Blackwood's journals, discovered 8 years later, the location Thibodeau described matches remarkably closely with where the doctor's secondary laboratory was believed to be situated. What makes the Blackwood case particularly significant in the study of medical ethics is how it illuminates a broader pattern of exploitation that existed throughout 19th century medicine. While Blackwood's methods were extreme even by the standards of his time, his fundamental belief that certain categories of humans could be used as research subjects without consent was not uncommon among his contemporaries. Medical historian Patricia Montgomery of Johns Hopkins University has spent decades studying what she terms shadow medicine, research conducted outside the boundaries of even the limited ethical frameworks that existed in previous centuries. In her 1963 monograph, The Unseen Patients, Montgomery documented 27 cases across the American South where enslaved individuals were used in medical experimentation between 1820 and 1865. The Blackwood case, unknown to Montgomery when she published her work, would have been the 28th. Montgomery's research suggests that such cases were likely far more numerous than the documentary record indicates, as physicians conducting such experiments had every reason to keep their activities hidden. Those who did publish their findings often obscured the nature and source of their research subjects, referring to them with clinical detachment as available specimens or similar euphemisms. What distinguished Blackwood from many of his contemporaries was not his willingness to experiment on the enslaved. Sadly, this was not uncommon, but rather the extreme nature of his experiments and his apparent descent into psychological disturbance as his work progressed. In October 1968, 4 months after Elijah Thompson's disappearance in the bayou, a collection of letters was donated to the Louisiana Historical Society by the descendants of Dr. James Reynolds, the Philadelphia physician whose correspondence had so disturbed Blackwood in June 1849. These letters, preserved by Reynolds' family for generations, provide critical context for understanding how Blackwood's research was viewed by at least some of his medical contemporaries. Reynolds' letter to Blackwood, dated June 2, 1849, makes clear that rumors of the New Orleans doctor's research had reached Philadelphia through a mutual acquaintance. Reynolds expresses horror at what he has heard and urges Blackwood to abandon this monstrous line of inquiry before it destroys not only your subjects, but your very humanity. What is particularly notable about Reynolds' letter is that his objection appears rooted not in concern for the enslaved individuals themselves, but rather in fear for Blackwood's psychological well-being. Reynolds writes of another physician, unnamed in the letter, who had conducted similar research in Virginia some years earlier and had descended into a state of nervous collapse from which he never recovered. Blackwood's reply, preserved in Reynolds' collection, is revealing in its brevity. Your concerns are noted but unnecessary. The advancement of medical science requires sacrifice. History will vindicate my methods. This letter is dated June 10, 1849, and marks one of the last times Blackwood appears to have communicated with the broader medical community. By July, Blackwood had withdrawn to his Bayou laboratory, severing almost all connections with his colleagues at Charity Hospital. Hospital attendance records, preserved in the institution's archives, show that he requested and was granted an extended leave for personal research, with his duties covered by other physicians. A subsequent letter from Reynolds, dated August 5th, received no reply. In this final communication, Reynolds writes, "I implore you once more to consider the path you have chosen. There are boundaries in medical science which, once crossed, forever alter the crosser. Some knowledge comes at too great a cost." This letter was found among Blackwood's effects after his death, unopened. Reynolds later became a vocal early advocate for medical ethics, publishing an influential pamphlet in 1853 titled On the Necessary Limitations of Medical Inquiry. While never explicitly mentioning Blackwood, the pamphlet contains passages that closely echo his letters to the New Orleans doctor. The site of Blackwood's French Quarter residence remained occupied until 1943, when the building was damaged by fire and subsequently demolished. Multiple occupants over the decades reported unusual phenomena in the home, particularly in the study where Blackwood died. These reports included unexplained cold areas, the smell of medicinal chemicals with no source, and most commonly, the sensation of being watched by someone standing just behind them. In 1938, the final private resident of the home, widow Elizabeth Carrington, gave an interview to the New Orleans Picayune in which she described finding unusual scratches on the inside of the study door each morning, despite having no pets and living alone. She also spoke of occasionally hearing what sounded like a man muttering calculations in the empty room. Carrington vacated the property shortly after the interview and refused to discuss her experiences further. Following the fire in 1943, the lot remained vacant until 1957, when it was purchased by a developer and converted into a small courtyard restaurant. Staff at the establishment have occasionally reported similar phenomena, particularly in the eastern corner of the property where Blackwood's study would have been located. These reports have become part of the restaurant's appeal, with some guides on French Quarter ghost tours including it as a stop. Though few know the true history behind the site's reputation, the fate of Blackwood's subjects remains the most tragic aspect of this historical case. Of the 5 men initially transferred from the Beaumont plantation to Charity Hospital, hospital records confirmed that none survived. Death certificates were filed for 3, with causes listed as pulmonary failure, cardiac arrest, and cerebral hemorrhage, respectively. No official documentation exists for the remaining 2 men. Historian Dorothy Walsh's identification of Solomon as one of the subjects represents the only instance where a name has been restored to these victims of medical exploitation. Despite extensive research, the identities of the other 4 men remain unknown, their individuality erased first by the institution of slavery and then by Blackwood's dehumanizing research methodology. In 1965, concurrent with the discovery of Blackwood's journals, an elderly woman named Esther Mouton approached the Louisiana Historical Society with a story passed down through generations of her family. According to Mouton, her great-grandmother had been enslaved on a plantation neighboring Beaumont's and had known one of the men taken by the doctor from the city. In the oral history preserved by Mouton's family, this man was a skilled carpenter named Isaac, who had a wife and 2 children on the neighboring plantation. When Isaac was sold to the hospital, his family was told he had been sent to work at another plantation further north. It was only months later, when another enslaved man who worked as a driver between the plantations and the city returned with rumors about the doctor's activities, that they learned the truth. Mouton's account included the detail that Isaac had been known for his distinctive singing voice, often leading work songs in the fields. According to the family story, in the months following Isaac's disappearance, workers on both plantations would occasionally hear what sounded like his voice coming from the direction of the bayou at dusk, though he was never seen again. While it is impossible to verify if Isaac was indeed one of Blackwood's subjects, the timeline and details of Mouton's account align with the documented transfer of men from the Beaumont plantation to Charity Hospital. If accurate, her family's oral history provides a glimpse of the human impact of Blackwood's actions, the severed families and communities left to wonder and grieve. The physical remnants of this history are few. The bayou continuously reclaims and transforms the landscape, obscuring whatever might remain of Blackwood's secondary laboratory. Charity Hospital stands vacant, its massive structure slowly deteriorating. The Beaumont Plantation House burned in 1873 and was never rebuilt, the land eventually subdivided and sold. What survives are papers, memories, and the persistent sense that something remains unresolved. The journals themselves, the primary source of information about Blackwood's experiments, create an ethical dilemma for historians. They contain valuable information about a dark chapter of medical history that should not be forgotten, yet they also represent the continuation of a profound violation, preserving Blackwood's voice while those of his subjects remain largely silenced. In 1969, when the decision was made to restrict access to the journals for 75 years, the Committee of Historians and Ethicists responsible issued a statement explaining their reasoning. These documents represent both essential historical evidence and a continuing injury. We choose to preserve rather than destroy them, but also to allow time for appropriate frameworks of interpretation and commemoration to develop. Frameworks that center the humanity of those who were treated as mere research subjects. That 75-year restriction expires in 2044. What will be done with Blackwood's journals then remains undecided. Some descendants of those enslaved in Louisiana during that period have advocated for creating a memorial that acknowledges this history without sensationalizing it. Others believe the journals should remain restricted indefinitely. Elijah Thompson, in his final academic paper before his disappearance in the bayou, wrote, "The historian's duty in cases like Blackwood's is not merely to document what happened, but to restore context and humanity where it was deliberately stripped away. We must be careful not to replicate the clinical gaze that allowed such abuses to occur in the first place." The most recent chapter in this long historical echo came in 2007, when Hurricane Katrina's catastrophic impact on New Orleans caused significant flooding in the basement archives of Charity Hospital. When recovery teams were finally able to access the building months later, they discovered that the section containing 19th century medical records had been completely submerged. While most documents were damaged beyond recovery, cleanup workers reported finding a single intact leather case floating on the surface of the floodwater in one storage room. According to their accounts, the case contained what appeared to be old medical instruments, carefully wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them despite the flooding. Before the case could be properly documented or its contents catalogued, it disappeared from the temporary storage where recovery items were being held. Official reports attributed the disappearance to the general chaos of post-Katrina recovery efforts, with thousands of items salvaged from damaged buildings being moved between temporary storage locations. However, some workers involved in the cleanup reported unsettling experiences while handling the case, particularly a persistent feeling of being watched and unusual breathing difficulties that subsided once they were away from the objects. In 2015, a construction worker involved in the ongoing redevelopment of the former Charity Hospital building discovered a small hidden space behind a wall in what had once been part of the segregated ward. Inside was a glass jar containing what appeared to be a preserved human heart, alongside a handwritten label that read simply, "Specimen number 3, limits of electrical stimulation reached, MB 1849. The jar and its contents were turned over to medical authorities, who confirmed that it indeed contained human remains. After examination, the remains were given a proper burial in an interfaith ceremony attended by historians, medical ethicists, and community members committed to honoring the unnamed individuals who suffered under Blackwood's experiments. A small marker in St. Louis Cemetery No. 3 commemorates this burial. The inscription reads, "Here lie the remains of those whose bodies were used without consent in the advancement of medical knowledge. Their names may be unknown, but their humanity is acknowledged and honored. May they rest in the peace they were denied in life." Each year, on September 23rd, the anniversary of Blackwood's ultimate threshold experiment, a small gathering is held at this marker. Attendees place stones rather than flowers, a tradition begun by Dorothy Walsh before her death to symbolize the permanence of remembrance. No speeches are made. The gathering observes several minutes of silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the city, and some say the faint echo of labored breathing that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The story of Dr. Mason Blackwood and his experiments represents more than just a historical curiosity or local legend. It stands as a stark reminder of medicine's complex moral history, how practices now recognized as profoundly unethical were once conducted in the name of scientific progress. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about whose suffering has been deemed acceptable in the pursuit of knowledge, and whose humanity has been denied in the process. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is not what Blackwood did, but how close his actions came to being erased from the historical record entirely. Had the renovation workers in 1965 been less observant, had Thomas Woodward chosen to burn rather than preserve the journals, had Elijah Thompson not recognized their significance, this history might have remained buried, its victims unnamed and unacknowledged. The waters of the Louisiana bayou continue to rise and fall with the seasons. Storm surges reshape the coastline, alternately burying and exposing the physical remnants of the past. Local fishermen still avoid certain channels and inlets, guided by inherited knowledge that some waters are simply not right. And sometimes, on particularly still nights when the humidity hangs heavy in the air, residents near the old hospital site report hearing what sounds like a scratching pen on paper, the sound of someone documenting observations that should never have been made, creating a record that could never be erased.